What's up, junkies? We're here at ASA Metropolis, and I'm standing next to men's pro Gary Studt, and he's going to run us through his setup for our What's the Pro shooting segment that's brought to you exclusively by Feather Vision Products. And Gary, run us through what you're shooting this for the ASAs.
Well, for the ASAs, my bow of choice is the Prime one. It's 39 inches axle to axle. It's got a 7.5 inch brace height in it, and I'm shooting mine at 27.5. And this bow comes with two options for shooting it off the stops. You can shoot a cable stop off the limb, which is a really solid wall that a lot of people like, or you could shoot a cable stop, so when you draw it back, it has a little bit more give on the back end, which is my choice. I like that back there to have a little give, so I can be a little bit more free shooting up and down hills, and when I'm nervous, it really helps me out quite a bit. So that's the bow that I shoot. And then I've got a Sherlock sight on here, and I shoot a Black Eagle lens with a 5-power lens, a 10 thou fiber with a drop pin. I don't know if you can get a picture of it.
Okay.
And that's the sight I'm using.
Do you run a light kit for that at all?
I do. Occasionally turn this light on. This doesn't have a real fancy light on it, just either it's on or it's off. Okay. And today on the range we had to use it quite a bit when we shot those targets out in the field with the bright lights, so that helped there.
All right, well, let's take a look at the arrow rest and kind of run me through, what you got going on for that.
All right, well, this is a Hamskea Versa rest, and I shoot it with the dropper down mode connected to the lower limb. Got the spring down here to really help the flutter on the end of the arrow rest when you shoot it. And I've also customized mine. You can see it's got a fair amount of overdraw on it. Get another look of it here. And the reason behind this being back that far was I was working on torque tuning my bow. And I would talk to Gillingham a little bit, and we kind of walked through it and tried to make it better. And when I had this arrow rest up here a little closer, if I torqued the bow, I could get some rights and some lefts. If I manually torqued it, like on purpose, not that I would ever torque it that much on purpose, but if you get them right, you can torque them and they'll still go down the middle. So I kept trying to prove that theory to myself that I could make that work. So I'd call Tim and we'd talk about what's going on. And with my arrow rest up here about where my nock was, at 20 yards, for example, I could torque the bow way to the left and hold it there and fire one, way to the right, hold it there and fire one at 20 yards. And I would, on a 5-spot NFA target at 20 yards, I would shoot the center of the 4 on the left, torque it the other way, and shoot the center of the 4 on the right. And that's about how far of a spread I had. And I talked to Tim about that a little bit and kept making adjustments, and I kept moving it back further and further. And when I got to this distance here, I could make that same amount of torque, and all 3 of them would hit the nocks and bust the nocks off the arrows at 20 yards.
Okay, so you've actually got like a separate bracket system going on here. You've gone so far.
Yeah, a guy at work customized and made me a little overdraw mount so I could move it back that far. And then what I did, I wanted to see, I was so surprised that I finally figured it out at 20 yards. I wanted to go see how it did at 40 to see if I needed to make some more micro adjustments in that, right? And when I got to 40 yards and I did the same test, it was still shooting dead center right down the middle just as much as a good arrow that I fired correctly. So even if I torqued the bow to where you could really tell it was way over there this way or that way, or shoot it down the middle and they all 3 would hit together, maybe just a touch high on the really torqued ones, because the arrow rides up in the V. Okay. Speaking of which, if we look at the V...
Let me come around here on the other side. Hold on one second.
This launcher blade is customized just a little bit. I'm shooting a 12 thousandths wide launcher blade with an X-cutter arrow, and I've taken the blade and I've bent it in a little bit just to cradle my arrow just a little bit more. And the goal there was to help with just a little bit more of left and rights if I made a little bit of mistake. So with this set, with this little bit of bend there, my right and lefts are as good as I can get them out of the bow, other than just making great shots. So I think that's about the best I could get it. And I did learn that I put a 10 thousandths backer blade behind the 12 thousandths launcher so that I don't run the risk of my blade breaking. You may have heard or seen some guys that break these launcher blades. Well, before it happens to you, go ahead and put a backer blade behind there so you don't have to worry about that.
Now, how far do you got that backer blade running up there?
Oh, the backer blade stops right about the bottom of where the cutout is on the launcher. So it comes 2/3 of the way up the launcher, the backer blade does. And that's a 10 thousandths backer blade on top or behind a 12 thousandths wide blade.
Okay. And then with your stabilizer setup, what do you got running there?
Okay, for my stabilizer setup, I'm running Doinker stabilizers, and I'm running the new Platinum Estremo stabilizers. I got a 28-inch stabilizer out the front with 4 ounces of weight, and I've got a 10-degree down angled quick disconnect. And then in the back, I've got a 15-inch bar, and I'm running 14.5 ounces on the back of my 15-inch bar in the back. And something else that I've done that's a little bit different than most, instead of running a side bracket, you may notice, especially if you look at it this way, I don't have, my stabilizer's coming almost right out the back of the bow, and I don't even have a mount here. I actually have two Doinker Platinum quick disconnects. Both of them are 10 degrees, and then I can rotate that around right where I wanted it. It's really close to the string. I don't put a lot of torque in the bow when I'm aiming it. I don't lean it one way or the other, so I want everything really straight. I don't need help straightening this bow out. So I went that direction, and it really worked out well versus a mount. Okay. And the reason why I thought of this was with the mount, this bow's kind of heavy, and I wanted to lighten it up just mass weight-wise. And when I went to the two quick disconnects versus a mount with the weight in the same place, I lost 4 ounces out of the bow, which was a good thing for me so I don't get as tired, right? So that's what I did with my stabilizer setup. And for those of you that might be interested in the 10-degree down, one of the benefits with this here is that when you draw a bow back and it hits the stops, right when it hits the stops, you may notice the bow does a little bit of wiggle. And if that 10-degree down will get that wiggle to stop just a little sooner, which allows you to start aiming and get aggressive at the shot a little bit faster than it would if you didn't have that. So that's the reason for the 10-degree down in the front. Actually thinking about trying a 15, and I may have that on there when you see me the next time, not sure. And as far as an arrow goes, I shoot a gold tip X cutter. Now, one of the things that everybody kind of hits me up on these is they're really, really short. They look like crossbow bolts. It is rare. It's 23¼ inches long, just the carbon arrow, which is a very, very short arrow. And obviously, having the overdraw here, that's the only way that it would get that short. That wasn't by choice, totally. I'm a short guy. I've only got 27.5-inch draw. So to still play with the right speed at the 290 speed limit, you know I need to get an arrow as light as I can get it and still get that velocity to help with judging yardage and whatnot. So I got to sacrifice sometimes here and there. So this is 23¼ inches long, running a 100 grain point in the front, running the uni bushings in the back with the new gold tip AccuLite, and I got 4 Fletch VaneTech arrows, or VaneTech vanes, and they've all got a little bit of a helical on them, and they're the 1.87 shield cut VaneTech vanes. And whenever you're running a light arrow like this, it only weighs 325 grains, it's very important to have a lot of control in the back, which is why I'm running the 4 and why it's got a little bit of helical in it. Okay?
Okay, and then with that overdraw, like you said, you got to have some good control on this bow. What's the release you got that you're setting up with?
Okay. Currently, I'm running a back tension release. I go back and forth a lot of times between a back tension or a button release. Right now, and most of this year, I've been shooting a Stanislavski Jet Black 3-finger, and I use it with the clicker. I didn't used to like the clicker, but the more I used it, the more I started to like it. I found it to be an advantage to me to where, you know, if I'm just standing there at 20 yards shooting, I probably wouldn't want the clicker. But when we're standing out here in the uneven ground, the clicker allows me that even when my footing's a little jacked up, I can make sure I get to that clicker and have a more predictable amount of travel left to get the shot to fire. But if it was dead flat ground, just shooting nice field targets, I probably wouldn't run the clicker. But I think it helps with the uneven footing, so that's the reason why I got it in there.
And real quickly before we let you go, we did want to ask you one more question. Talk to us about, you've got a new product out that you're helping the archers with called Sound Judging. And I believe it's like a DVD or that you got put together or something they can listen to. Tell me what that's all about and you know, where you can get it.
Oh, very good. Yeah, it is a sound judging CD. The whole purpose behind the CD is another way to help yourself judge yardage, and it's based off of sound. Okay. So I wanted to make one for myself, right? And I remember one back in the day. I think Melvin Shrewsbury made one at 280 feet a second, and the new speed rule went up to 290, so I wanted to make one. And you got the Grace. So most of the pros kind of target their bow 293, 295. So I got with one of the fellows from my local church, and he had all the audio equipment, and we went outside and we did some recording at 293 feet a second at 30 yards, 40 yards, and 50 yards, and we recorded soundtracks. We took those soundtracks, we smoothed them out so they would sound good on a CD, and we made those to where we could put them on the CD and get out to the public and teach the public that there is a difference between sound shots when you shoot at a target. And that difference will not change if you're shooting over a pond, across a valley, if you're shooting out in an open field, or if you're shooting out in the woods. If you hear that sound out of a bow traveling 293 feet a second, it's real and it'll never change. Kind of like the size of the target, right? That coyote's that big at 20 yards, and that coyote's still that big at 50 yards. So that never changes. That's your number one, right? Visually, how far does the target look? And if you're like me and you work all day and you don't have a lot of time to practice, having another tool to sit there and practice is a great thing. For me, for example, using the sound judging CD every day at lunchtime, my goal is to listen to 25 shots. And I record those 25 shots, whether I'm getting them right or getting them wrong, and which way I miss when I do make a mistake. And I've just started narrowing them down. I've got to the point where I can get them pretty much every one of them right. And in the future, as everybody starts to use the CD and get better at it, we'll look at making one a little bit tighter, maybe every 5 yards instead of every 10 yards. The CD is available online at www.soundjudging.com. You can purchase the CD online, or if you see me at one of the ASA events in the Doinker vending booth, we have the CDs available there as well for $20.
Well, that's a heck of a setup you got there. We appreciate you taking the time and talking with us, and good luck the rest of the weekend.
Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate it.
Thank you.